Some AEW news and notes. Impact Wrestling announced. I love it when I start an AEW news and notes section and I say Impact Wrestling. But now the companies they're intertwined now. Impact Wrestling announced a match for the Impact Tag Team titles, with the Good Brothers, Anderson and Gallows, defending against Private Party. That is now set for the No Surrender pay-per-view on February 13th. Well, how did this come about? Matt Hardy and Private Party made a surprise appearance on Impact Wrestling last week, with Private Party beating Chris Sabin and James Storm in the main event with the assist from an AEW producer, Jerry Lynn, who was there as a guest at the show with Tony Khan. They had tickets. They sat ringside, and Jerry Lynn got involved for the finish. Private Party picks up the win, and so Marquen and Isaiah Cassidy are now number one contenders for the Impact Tag Team titles, and so that match now is official for February 13th. The AEW Revolution pay-per-view, which had originally been scheduled for February 27th, is, per PW Insider, going to be moved back to Sunday, March 7th. And AEW has not made the announcement yet. That is going to be made at some point this week. Apparently they're pushing it back because of the Canelo Alvarez fight taking place on the 27th, and so they don't want to compete with that event. This will be the first AEW pay-per-view airing on a Sunday night. And speaking of Revolution, Sting, it is now official. Sting's debut match in AEW will be a street fight on that Revolution pay-per-view. It'll be Sting and Darby Allin as partners taking on Team Taz. They have not said anything more beyond that. Sting and Darby are going to be on Dynamite this Wednesday to talk about the match. I assume it's going to be a cinematic match. That's why they made it a street fight. It will probably literally be filmed in a street or on a closed set made to look like a street. Because Sting, when he was on the AEW podcast Unrestricted a few weeks ago, he said that, yes, you are going to see me in cinematic matches. When Tony Khan asked him, would you be interested in doing cinematic style matches? Sting said yes. So I assume that means that he is either not cleared to do a regular match or they just don't want to take the chance. And the safest way to use Sting is in a cinematic taped environment where he can be protected. They can edit as needed. And it's playing out exactly the way that I said it would when I did my predictions at the beginning of the year. I said, look, Sting is going to wrestle, I think, 3 matches this year, all cinematic. And the first one would be him and Darby, not as opponents, but as partners against Team Taz. And that's exactly what's happening. I said the other 2 opponents that I think Sting is going to match up with this year is Chris Jericho, because you know Jericho's not going to want to resist being able to have, finally, after all these years, have a big, let's say, pay-per-view match against Sting. And I think Sting and Cody at some point are going to have a match this year as well. And I think those are going to be the 3. Now, speaking of Team Taz, Will Hobbs, Powerhouse Hobbs, he was on the AEW Unrestricted podcast, and he talked about being on WWE's radar for a few years. He had a tryout in WWE. He actually wrestled a dark match against Baron Corbin. And he said that things went well, or so he thought. This is what he had to say. He said, the tryout was good. They said, we don't have anything for you right now. Years later, the carrot dangled in front of me, and I pretty much told them, fuck you. Right when I appeared on AEW, you want to be like, hey, remember me? The way I was raised, I don't have time for that shit. I'm not Boo-Boo the Fool. As my grandma would say, boy, his grandma's awesome. Boo-Boo the Fool. I got to start using that. Hey, we've been thinking about you, and we are interested in you. He said, no, fuck you. I ain't no sucker. I'd rather you tell me 100% no than try to BS me. So Will Hobbs ain't having none of that shit. Will Hobbs had a very direct message there for WWE. I don't think it's wise for him to be burning bridges like that, but I can respect him speaking out on how he really feels. This is not the first story of somebody getting attention from AEW and all of a sudden hearing back from WWE. His Team Taz stablemate, in fact, Ricky Starks, had a similar story on Chris Van Vliet's podcast, Stark said the day that he wrestled Cody Rhodes on Dynamite, okay, the same day, he got a call from WWE saying, hey, we've been watching you and we wanted to bring you in. Which was very convenient that they wanted to bring him in on that day. But that's what they do. That is what they do. Their goal is not just to sign the people they like. Yes, of course, WWE, they have these camps and these tryouts and they pick the people that they think can make them money and become big stars. But it's not just that. It's not just that. Their goal is not just to sign talent they like. Their goal, absolutely 100%, and if you don't see it, you're blind as a bat. Their goal is to sign talent simply to keep them away from AEW. So I can understand somebody like Will Hobbs getting hot over it. You want to know that if somebody wants to work with you, it's because they see something in you. Not because you're just another chess piece on a board to keep away from somebody else so you can be stockpiled like everybody else at the PC. This is what they do. Triple H's favorite show is not NXT. Triple H's favorite show is AEW Dark. And Tony Khan appeared on Renee Young's Oral Sessions podcast. Boy, there's a lot of podcasts that are causing either controversy or are leading to news. We had The Undertaker with Joe Rogan. We had Will Hobbs on the AEW podcast. Now Tony Khan shows up on Renee Young's podcast. And when he was asked about his favorite matches, what are your go-to matches that you would tell somebody who is not a wrestling fan to go watch if you wanted to really show them what pro wrestling is all about? He said that it's changed over time, but he cited Randy Savage against Ricky Steamboat from WrestleMania 3, which I would think, for a lot of old school fans, that's going to be an obvious choice. Bret Hart against Mr. Perfect from the King of the Ring in 1993, and Brock Lesnar's return match against John Cena at Extreme Rules in 2012. Today, he said it would be Hangman and Omega against the Young Bucks at last year's Revolution pay-per-view. And in fact, he said that entire pay-per-view he would recommend because he believes that that is the best wrestling pay-per-view ever produced, was that Revolution show from last February, which is up for debate. I mean, it was a great show. We'll not deny that. It was a great pay-per-view. Was it the best pay-per-view ever of all time? I don't know that I would go that far. But I was so happy that he mentioned that King of the Ring 93 match. That match is one of my favorite matches of all time. The wrestling was great, but there's just something about that match in that building. They were in the Nutter Center, which I love that name. But they were in the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio. And there was just something about that building, the way it looked, the way the ring was mic'd. It was so loud that night, but the way the ring was mic'd, the commentary, everything was just on point. Absolutely. The match that I would show somebody if I wanted them to convince them to give wrestling a shot would be that match. And that John Cena Brock Lesnar match, I believe that was my match of the year pick for 2012. I love that match. It was unlike any other WWE pay-per-view main event that we had ever seen. Up to that point. It was a spectacle. So he's got some good taste.